You're a virgin, and I need sons. That's what the giant Apache declared to the cowgirl, right in the middle of Dry Fork Crossing. Folks dropped their tools. The church bell froze in the air. He wasn't asking for her hand. He was demanding a future for his people. But the cowgirl, she's the last soul standing between her family's land and a cattle king who's damming every creek in sight. Marry a man she barely knows, or watch her land and his tribe turn to dust. But what no one's telling is this. What starts as a bargain for water might awaken a fight for something deeper. There's a paper in town that can destroy them both, if the wrong hands get hold of it. When the chain clinks on the jailhouse door and the dust settles on the church steps, who'll be left standing? The man who needs sons? The woman who needs to survive? Or the town that needs to choose between pride and mercy? Every story begins with a heartbeat. Tell me, where are you in the world today? And how are you really doing? Your words make this space feel more human. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dry Fork Crossing's churchyard as Delilah Quinn stood before her father's fresh grave. Her red hair glowed like copper in the dawn light, pulled back in a simple braid that hung heavily down her back. The crisp autumn air carried whispers from the gathered townsfolk, sharp as thorns to her ears. "Poor thing, all alone now," Martha Wilson muttered to her neighbor. "That Quinn ranch is too much for a single woman," Thomas Baker added, not bothering to lower his voice, especially with water being what it is. Delilah's fingers tightened around her worn Bible, its leather smooth from years of her father's handling. Preacher Burke's final prayers echoed across the quiet cemetery, his deep voice carrying comfort she couldn't quite feel yet. As the townsfolk dispersed, their boots crunching on the dry earth, Delilah remained. The wooden cross bore her father's name in fresh carved letters. Daniel Quinn. Just below his name were the words, "Beloved Father," and the dates marking his 52 years of life. Later that morning, Delilah stood at the ranch's well. Her sleeve rolled up as she lowered the bucket once more. The rope creaked against the worn pulley, and the hollow clunk of wood hitting dry stone echoed up from below. The sound matched the hollow feeling in her chest. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the shimmer of heat waves rising off the dusty road. Delilah recognized him immediately, Taza Red Moon, the Apache scout who sometimes worked with the cavalry. His worn blue shirt stretched across broad shoulders, and his dark eyes held her gaze steadily as he dismounted. Several townspeople had followed him, curiosity evident in their eager faces. Mrs. Wilson and her sewing circle had abandoned their porch across the way, inching closer to witness whatever was about to unfold. Taza's boots raised small clouds of dust as he approached. He stopped a respectful distance from Delilah, his expression serious. "You're a virgin, and I need sons," he declared, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Delilah felt heat rush to her face, partly from anger and partly from mortification. She was acutely aware of the gasps and mutters from their growing audience. "How dare you?" she managed, her voice shaking. But Taza remained unruffled by her reaction. His calm voice cut through her indignation as he explained, "The cattle syndicate has dammed our river. My people's crops wither. Your ranch has the last free-flowing spring." He gestured to the north, where her father's carefully maintained spring fed their cattle. "If you marry, water rights go to your husband." The practical logic of his words hit her like a bucket of cold water, dousing some of her initial outrage. Still, she squared her shoulders. "And you think declaring my personal status in public is the way to discuss this?" "I speak truth," Taza replied simply. "No shame in it." The townsfolk had drawn even closer now, their faces a mix of scandal and fascination. Delilah could already imagine how this scene would be repeated in every parlor and general store in the territory by sunset. As evening settled over the ranch, Delilah sat at her kitchen table. The lonely sound of her fork scraping against a tin plate filled the room. The beans and cornbread she'd prepared sat barely touched, her appetite diminished by the day's events. The lamp's flame cast dancing shadows on the walls of the home she'd shared with her father, now feeling larger and emptier than ever before. A knock at the door startled her. Preacher Burke's weathered face appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Evening, Miss Quinn. May I come in?" Delilah nodded, quickly standing to pour him a cup of coffee. The preacher settled his lanky frame into a chair, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. "I've got news you need to hear," he said without preamble. "Clayton Sykes was at the land office today. He's filing a legal challenge to your water rights." Delilah's hands gripped the back of her chair. "He can't do that. Papa's papers are all proper." "Sykes claims a single woman can't maintain the water requirements for the territory." The preacher's voice was gentle but firm. "He's got lawyers, Delilah. Good ones." She turned to stare out the window at her father's fields, now touched with evening shadow. The spring that had sustained their cattle and crops for 20 years burbled somewhere in the darkness, suddenly seeming more precious than gold. Taza's words from that morning echoed in her mind, taking on new weight as she considered her dwindling options. The preacher watched her carefully over his coffee cup, waiting for her response. But Delilah remained silent, her mind churning with the impossible choice before her. Lose everything to Sykes, or consider the most unexpected marriage proposal she'd ever imagined. The morning sun beat down on Delilah's back as she urged her horse toward town, dust rising from each hoof strike against the dry earth. Her mind had churned all night with thoughts of Sykes, water rights, and Taza's shocking proposal. Now, determination set her jaw firm as she spotted the Apache scout's tall figure outside Miller's general store. Taza stood beside his horse, speaking quietly with another tribal member. His dark eyes tracked her approach, calm and steady as she drew her mount to a halt. "We need to talk," Delilah announced, swinging down from her saddle. Several townspeople paused their morning errands to watch, but she ignored them. "Was yesterday's offer serious?" "I do not speak empty words," Taza replied, his voice low and measured. He gestured toward the store's wooden sidewalk, away from prying ears. Delilah followed, her boots clicking against the planks. "My people are dying," Taza explained, his expression grave. "The syndicate's dam leaves our crops to wither, our children thirsty, but I will not force you. Choice must be yours." The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh-baked bread from the cafe down the street, a reminder of the normal life she'd had just days ago. Delilah squared her shoulders. "I have a counter-proposal." Taza tilted his head slightly, waiting. "A legal marriage," she said firmly. "On paper only. No bed sharing, no sons, just the documents to stop Sykes from taking the water rights." A few feet away, Mrs. Wilson nearly dropped her shopping basket, clearly straining to hear every word. "Marriage is sacred," Taza responded, his tone carrying a note of warning. "Even one of convenience must be honored with respect. I will not mock such bonds." Delilah met his steady gaze. "I'm not asking to mock anything. I'm offering a partnership to protect what matters to both of us." Taza studied her face for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Agreed. But we do this properly before your preacher and witnesses." "Today," Delilah insisted, glancing toward the land office where Sykes's legal challenge awaited, "before he can stop us." They found Preacher Burke in his study behind the church, his weathered face creasing with concern as they explained their plan. "Marriage isn't something to enter lightly," he cautioned, looking between them. "Even one of unusual circumstances." "Would you rather see Sykes control all the water?" Delilah challenged. "Watch families suffer while he builds his empire." The preacher sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. 3:00, he finally agreed. "I'll need time to prepare the papers." Word spread through town like wildfire. By the time 3:00 arrived, half of Dry Fork Crossing had gathered around the church steps. Ladies in their afternoon dresses whispered behind gloved hands, while ranchers and merchants stood in clusters, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Delilah approached the church in her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days. She'd pinned her red hair carefully and added a small white flower, refusing to look shabby even for a marriage of convenience. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her chin high. Taza waited on the church steps, wearing a clean cavalry shirt and dark trousers. His long hair was neatly tied back, and his bearing was dignified despite the stares and mutters from the crowd. From his buckboard across the street, Clayton Sykes watched the proceedings, his handsome face twisted with barely contained rage. His knuckles were white where they gripped the reins, but he made no move to interrupt. Preacher Burke's voice carried clearly in the afternoon air as he began the ceremony. Delilah barely heard the familiar words, focusing instead on keeping her hands steady as she held the small Bible her father had given her. When it came time for the vows, she spoke clearly, pretending the tremor in her voice was from determination rather than fear. Taza's responses were equally clear, his accent shaping the English words with careful precision. His large hand was warm and calloused when it briefly held hers to exchange rings, simple bands, purchased hastily from the general store. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Preacher Burke pronounced, looking pointedly toward Sykes's buckboard. The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, a few muttering, "Amen," more from habit than conviction. As the sun set that evening, Delilah sat alone at her kitchen table, a lamp casting yellow light across the marriage certificate before her. The familiar sounds of the ranch at night drifted through the open window, crickets chirping, cattle lowing softly in the distance, and the gentle creak of the barn where Taza had quietly gone to sleep in the hay. She traced her fingers over their signatures still fresh on the paper. In just one day, everything had changed. She was no longer simply Delilah Quinn, but Mrs. Taza Redmoon, a name that would raise eyebrows across the territory. The lamp's flame flickered as a night breeze stirred, and Delilah wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of her decision settle around her like the gathering darkness. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pink when Delilah stepped onto her front porch, clutching a steaming coffee mug. The morning air carried the scent of sage and dew-dampened earth. Her eyes found Taza immediately, his tall figure already at work along the broken fence line that stretched toward the creek. She watched as he expertly wove new wire between weathered posts, his movements precise and efficient. Even from a distance, she could see how he tested each repair with careful attention, making sure it would hold against restless cattle. Setting her coffee aside, Delilah smoothed her work skirt and walked toward the kitchen door. If they were to be partners, even just on paper, they needed to establish how things would work. 10 minutes later, she stepped back onto the porch. "Breakfast is ready," she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet morning air. Taza looked up, nodded once, and secured the final strand of wire he was working on. He walked toward the house with unhurried steps, pausing to wash his hands at the pump before entering the kitchen. Delilah had set out a simple meal of cornbread, eggs, and coffee. She remained standing as he took a seat, her hands clasped firmly before her. "We need to be clear about things," she said, meeting his dark eyes directly. "This arrangement between us, it's a partnership, nothing more. We'll work together to protect the water rights, but that's where it ends." Taza reached for the coffee pot, pouring a measure into the cup she'd set out. "Boundaries are good," he replied, his voice carrying its usual calm. "Clear lines make strong fences." Something in Delilah's shoulders relaxed at his simple acceptance. She sat down across from him, and they ate in companionable silence, broken only by the gentle clink of forks against plates. After breakfast, Taza led her to the irrigation ditches that fed the eastern pastures. The morning sun grew stronger as he showed her how his people had managed water flow for generations. His large hands shaped the earth with practiced skill, demonstrating how small changes in the channel's curve could improve flow. "Water finds its own path," he explained, redirecting a trickle with careful movements. "Our task is to guide it wisely, not force it." Delilah knelt beside him, her skirt gathering dust as she mimicked his techniques. The work was precise, requiring patience she hadn't known she possessed. By midday they had improved 3 major channels, and she could already see the difference in water distribution. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in deep orange, when they heard hoofbeats approaching. A young boy on a dusty pony rode up, his telegram messenger's bag bouncing against his hip. Mrs. Redmoon, he corrected himself, pulling a yellow envelope from his bag. This just came through from the county seat. Delilah's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the telegram. The boy waited, shifting in his saddle, clearly hoping to carry any reply back to town. Her face paled as she read the brief message. "No reply needed, Tommy," she said quietly, pressing a penny into his hand. The boy tipped his hat and rode away, leaving a trail of dust in the gathering dusk. Inside the kitchen, Delilah paced the wooden floor, the telegram crumpled in her fist. Taza sat at the table, methodically sharpening his hunting knife against a whetstone. The steady, scraping sound filled the room as she finally spoke. "Sykes has filed a legal petition," she said, her voice tight with anger. "He's challenging our marriage, claiming it's a fraud meant to obstruct his rightful water claims." She slapped the telegram onto the table. "The hearing is set for 3 days from now." The scraping of stone against steel paused. "He moves quickly," Taza observed, testing the knife's edge with his thumb. "What if they rule against us?" Delilah demanded, resuming her pacing. "What if they annul the marriage?" "Then we fight," Taza replied simply, returning to his sharpening. "Your father's papers prove the water rights. We gathered witnesses for our vows. Truth stands stronger than Sykes's lies." Delilah's boot heels clicked against the floor as she made another circuit of the kitchen. The lamplight threw their shadows against the walls. Her moving restlessly, him steady and still, but for the rhythm of blade against stone. Neither had expected their arrangement to face such a challenge so soon, and the weight of it filled the room like an unseen presence. The knife's edge gleamed in the lamplight as Taza held it up for inspection. Outside, a coyote called into the gathering night, its cry carrying across the ranch lands they had both pledged, in their own ways, to protect. 2 days later, the morning sun cast long shadows across Dry Fork's dusty main street as Delilah and Taza rode side by side toward the general store. Their horses' hooves kicked up small clouds with each step, the sound echoing against the weathered wooden buildings. Delilah sat straight in her saddle, pretending not to notice the townsfolk who paused their morning errands to stare. Mrs. Peterson dropped her basket of eggs. The banker's wife hurried her children across the street. 2 ranch hands lounging outside the saloon spat in the dirt, muttering under their breath as Taza dismounted and offered Delilah his hand. "Don't need no savage's help," one of them called out, loud enough to carry. Taza's expression remained unchanged as he helped Delilah down, his movements deliberate and dignified. His calm in the face of their hatred made Delilah's cheeks burn with shame for her neighbors. Inside the store, the floorboards creaked beneath their boots as they gathered supplies: sugar, coffee, ammunition for the ranch's rifle. The shopkeeper's wife watched them with narrow eyes, counting their coins twice before accepting payment. "Delilah Quinn," a warm voice called from near the fabric bolts. Martha Lou Jennings, her gray hair neat beneath her bonnet, beckoned Delilah closer, while Taza examined hunting knives at the counter. "It's Redmoon now," Delilah corrected quietly, moving to join the older woman. Martha Lou's weathered hand smoothed imaginary wrinkles from a bolt of calico. "Best watch yourself at that hearing tomorrow," she murmured, keeping her voice low. "Word is, Sykes rode to Junction City 3 days ago with mighty full saddlebags. Judge Harrison's got a weakness for poker and unpaid debts." Delilah's stomach tightened. "He's trying to buy the verdict?" "Wouldn't be the first time." Martha Lou patted her arm. "You ain't the only widow woman who's faced down Sykes's tricks. Stay strong, child." The ride home stretched quiet beneath the afternoon sun. Delilah's mind churned with Martha Lou's warning as they passed familiar landmarks. The lightning-struck oak, the 3 rock cairn marking the trail fork. That evening, after the horses were settled and supper dishes cleared, Delilah paced the kitchen while Taza sat at the rough-hewn table. If Sykes has already paid off the judge, she said, what chance do we have? There are ways, Taza replied, his deep voice steady. My people have faced corrupt officials before. We learn to fight with more than just papers and coins. Delilah stopped pacing. What do you mean? They question if our marriage is real. Taza's dark eyes met hers. I can teach you our customs, our ways of showing respect between husband and wife, small things that cannot be faked for show. Like what? How we share food, how we speak to elders, how a wife stands when her husband enters. He gestured to the coffee pot, even how we pour drinks, always with the right hand, never the left. Delilah considered this, then nodded slowly. Teach me. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They rode out early to check the cattle, and Taza guided them toward the spring that fed the contested water rights. He dismounted near the burbling source, motioning for Delilah to join him. Water is sacred to my people, he explained, kneeling beside the spring. We call it Tu. It carries the spirits of our ancestors. He cupped his hands, letting the crystal water flow through his fingers. Before taking, we always give thanks. He taught her the words of blessing, patient as she stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds. Her tongue felt clumsy trying to shape Apache syllables, but Taza nodded encouragement when she finally pronounced "ahe-he," thank you, correctly. They spent the morning moving cattle to fresh grazing, with Taza teaching her more words. Mustang came from his people's word Mostang, he explained, and Begashi meant cattle. Delilah found herself watching him as they worked, noting how he handled the animals with quiet confidence, how his movements never wasted energy. As evening painted the sky in soft purples and oranges, they sat down to a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Delilah remembered to pour his coffee with her right hand, earning a small nod of approval. When she passed him the cornbread, she used both hands as he'd shown her, a gesture of respect. You learn quickly, he observed. Had a good teacher, she replied, surprising herself with the warmth in her voice. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the space between them. The corners of Taza's mouth lifted slightly, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Without thinking, Delilah smiled back, and for a moment the weight of tomorrow's hearing felt a little lighter to bear. Dawn broke over Dry Fork with a whisper of wind that rattled the schoolhouse windows. Delilah stood before her bedroom mirror, fingers trembling as she pulled her father's old duster coat from its peg. The worn leather still carried his scent, tobacco and saddle soap. She slipped it on, the familiar weight settling across her shoulders like armor. Your father wore that coat to every water rights meeting, Taza observed from the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. Delilah smoothed the lapels. Reckon I need his strength today. They rode into town as the morning sun climbed higher, the schoolhouse bell tolling 8 times. Townsfolk lined the dirt street, watching their approach with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Martha Lou Jennings stood on the general store porch, offering a small wave of encouragement. Inside the schoolhouse, desks had been pushed aside to make room for rows of chairs. Judge Harrison, a heavy-set man with drooping jowls, sat behind the teacher's desk, which served as his temporary bench. Clayton Sykes occupied the front row, his expensive suit and polished boots a stark contrast to the simple surroundings. "All rise!" called the clerk, and the assembled crowd shuffled to their feet. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, borrowed from the town council meetings, and adjusted his spectacles. We're here to consider the petition filed by Clayton Sykes regarding the marriage of Delilah Quinn. And, he squinted at the paper. Taza Redmoon. Sykes rose smoothly, his voice carrying to the rafters. Your Honor, this so-called marriage is nothing but a transparent attempt to circumvent proper water rights allocation. Miss Quinn, and I maintain that is still her proper name, entered into this arrangement purely to block legitimate business interests. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Delilah's hands clenched in her lap, the leather of her father's coat creaking. I have witnesses, Sykes continued, who will testify that this union was arranged within hours of my filing water rights papers. Moreover, the couple," his lip curled slightly, "maintain separate sleeping quarters. This is no true marriage, but a mockery of the institution." The judge nodded thoughtfully, though Delilah noticed his eyes darting nervously toward Sykes's saddlebags, propped conspicuously against his chair. "Mr. Redmoon," Judge Harrison said, "do you wish to speak in your defense?" Taza stood, his presence commanding instant attention. "I do." His deep voice filled the room with quiet authority. "Among my people, marriage is not measured in shared beds or quick passion. It is a bond of mutual survival, a joining of strengths to face life's challenges together." He gestured to Delilah. "We work side by side, sharing water, sharing labor, sharing purpose. This is marriage in its truest form, two becoming one in the fight to preserve what matters most." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Several of the older ranchers nodded slowly, their own marriages built on similar foundations of practical partnership. "Your Honor," Preacher Burke's voice rang out as he rose from his seat, "if I may speak?" The judge waved him forward, and Burke moved to stand beside Delilah and Taza. "I performed this ceremony in good faith before God and this community. Their vows were sincere, their commitment genuine. Who are we to judge the shape of their union when their hearts are true to its purpose?" More whispers filled the room. Delilah saw Mrs. Peterson dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, while the banker's wife pressed her lips into a thin line of disapproval. Judge Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking from Sykes's confident smirk to the intent faces of the townspeople. "This is a complex matter requiring careful consideration," he said finally. "I will take 1 week to review the evidence and render my decision." The gavel fell with a sharp crack. As people began filing out, Delilah caught Sykes watching her with cold calculation. His confidence suggested the judge's delay was merely a formality. Outside, the town's division was clear as creek water. Martha Lou and several other ranch wives approached Delilah with words of support, while a group of men clustered around Sykes, shooting dark looks in their direction. "That Indian's got nerve. Speaking of marriage like he knows anything about Christian ways," someone muttered loud enough to carry. "Girl's got gumption, though," another voice countered. John Quinn raised her right. Taza helped Delilah mount her horse, his movements deliberate and dignified despite the stares. They rode in silence until the town disappeared behind them, the familiar sight of their ranch buildings rising ahead. 1 week, Delilah said quietly. Taza nodded, his expression grave. "This fight has only begun, my wife." The word held no intimacy, only respect and shared purpose. "Sykes will not stop until he controls every drop of water in the territory." The autumn wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of change. Whether for good or ill remained to be seen. Morning sunlight painted the fence posts golden as Delilah and Taza worked their way along the property line. The steady rhythm of hammering echoed across the rangeland, while meadowlarks called from the scrub brush. Delilah wiped sweat from her brow, watching Taza's sure movements as he secured another post. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look up. A small group of Apache children rode toward them on painted ponies, led by a teenage girl. They carried something wrapped in trade blankets. Taza straightened, speaking a few soft words in Apache. The children dismounted gracefully, and the oldest girl stepped forward with a shy smile. "These are from the mothers of our village," she said in careful English, unveiling 3 intricately woven baskets. "To thank you for sharing the water." Delilah's throat tightened as she accepted the gifts. The baskets were beautiful, each pattern telling a story of rivers and rain clouds. But it was the children's faces that struck her deeply, bright eyes full of hope and trust. "They're lovely," she managed. "Please thank your mothers for me." The smallest child, a boy no more than 6 years old, tugged at Taza's sleeve and whispered something. Taza's stern face softened as he lifted the boy onto his shoulders, pointing toward the spring. "He asked to see the sacred water," Taza explained. Delilah nodded, leading the small group to where clear water bubbled from the earth. The children gathered around, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. One little girl dipped her fingers in the spring, then touched them to her forehead in blessing. Watching them, Delilah felt something shift in her heart. These weren't just nameless people affected by water rights. They were families, children, mothers weaving beauty even in hard times. Her father's spring meant life itself to them. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of an approaching buggy. A well-dressed stranger pulled up in a smart-looking rig, his city clothes marking him as an outsider. "Miss Quinn?" he called, ignoring Taza and the children completely. "Mr. Beecham of the Western Pacific Railroad. Might I have a word?" Taza quietly urged the children to mount up, sending them home with gentle words. Delilah squared her shoulders and approached the buggy, noting the man's expensive pocket watch and silk tie. "Actually, it's Mrs. Quinn Redmoon now," she corrected. "What can I do for you?" Beecham's smile never reached his eyes. "Mr. Sykes suggested I pay you a visit. The railroad has a profound interest in water rights along our planned expansion route." He pulled out a leather folder. "I'm authorized to offer you $5,000 for your spring rights. Cash money right now." Delilah's heart jumped at the sum, enough to clear her father's debts and then some. But the memory of those children's faces flashed through her mind. "Not interested," she said firmly. "10,000, Beecham countered smoothly. "Think carefully, Mrs. Quinn Redmoon. That's more money than most folks see in a lifetime." "The spring's not for sale. At any price." Beecham's pleasant mask slipped slightly. "Don't be foolish, young lady. Progress is coming whether you like it or not. Better to profit from it than be crushed beneath its wheels." "I believe my wife gave you her answer," Taza said quietly, moving to stand beside Delilah. His calm presence steadied her. The railroad man's lip curled. "Indeed she did. Good day to you both." He flicked his reins, turning his buggy toward town. As dust settled behind Beecham's departing rig, Taza's expression grew troubled. "The railroad's involvement changes things. They want more than just water rights." "What do you mean?" "Their planned route. It must cross Apache land. If they control the water, they control where people can live." Thunder rumbled in the distance as Taza spoke. "Sykes is likely helping them clear the way." Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as they finished the fence line. By sunset, the storm arrived in force, bringing sheets of rain and crackling lightning. Delilah stood at the kitchen window, watching nature's fury illuminate the yard in brilliant flashes. A particularly loud thunderclap made her jump. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see Taza in the barn doorway, securing the horses for the night. His tall figure moved with steady purpose, unfazed by the storm's rage. Something about his presence calmed her racing thoughts. Here was a man who faced every challenge, from prejudice to railroad schemes, with unwavering dignity. The same quiet strength that had first struck her as arrogance now felt like an anchor in uncertain waters. When Taza finally came in through the kitchen door, shaking rain from his hat, Delilah had coffee waiting. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm's symphony while steam rose from their cups. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me understand what's really at stake here." Taza nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "We face this storm together," he replied simply. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the kitchen, Delilah felt strangely at peace. Dawn crept over the ranch in watery streaks of gray. The storm had softened to a steady drizzle, but its damage was clear. Puddles dotted the yard, and rushing water carved channels through the mud. Delilah stood on the porch clutching a steaming cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on the flooded lower pasture where the cattle pen stood. "We need to check the calves," she said, as Taza emerged from the barn, leading their horses. He nodded grimly, already wearing his oilskin coat. They rode down together, hooves splashing through newly formed streams. The closer they got to the pens, the worse it looked. Water swirled around the fence posts, and frightened bawling echoed across the sodden landscape. There! Delilah pointed to where 3 calves huddled on a shrinking island of higher ground. Their mothers paced anxiously in deeper water nearby. Taza dismounted first, tying his horse to higher ground. "We'll need ropes," he said, already uncoiling his lariat. "The mud will be treacherous." Working as one, they waded into the flood. Cold water soaked through Delilah's boots as she sloshed toward the stranded calves. The first 2 were easier, scared but cooperative as they guided them to safety with gentle words and careful hands. The 3rd calf proved more difficult. It had backed itself against a fence post, wild-eyed with fear. As Delilah approached, her boot caught in the sucking mud. She pitched forward with a startled cry. Strong arms caught her before she hit the water. Taza's chest was solid against her back, his breath warm on her neck as he steadied her. For a heartbeat, they stayed frozen like that, their shared warmth a stark contrast to the cold rain. "I've got you," he murmured, and something in his voice made her cheeks flush despite the chill. Delilah straightened quickly, but the moment lingered like lightning in summer air. They managed to rescue the last calf together, their hands brushing as they guided it to safety. By evening they were both exhausted and mud-splattered, but satisfied that no livestock had been lost. Delilah lit the kitchen lantern while Taza built up the fire. Their wet clothes steamed gently as they sat down to a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls as they ate. Something about the stormy darkness outside made the kitchen feel smaller, more intimate. Perhaps that was why Taza began to speak, his voice low and measured. "When I was a boy," he said, breaking their comfortable silence, "the rivers ran free through our lands. The old ones knew every bend, every deep pool where fish gathered." He paused, stirring his beans. "Now the dams block the water's path. Our children sicken from stagnant pools, and the desert creeps closer each year." Delilah set down her fork, struck by the pain beneath his calm words. "My sister's youngest died last summer," he continued. "The doctor said it was fever, but it was the bad water that took him. He was 4 years old." Taza's hands tightened around his cup. "That is why I came to you, not just for water rights, but for life itself." "I'm so sorry," Delilah whispered, her heart aching. She reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. This time, neither of them pulled away. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by touch and shared understanding. Finally, Delilah spoke, her voice stronger. "We need to show the town that working together benefits everyone." An idea took shape in her mind. What if we held a community barn raising? Taza tilted his head, questioning. "The storm damaged Miller's barn, too. I saw it when we rode past," she explained, warming to her plan. "If we could get Martha Lou and the other widows involved, maybe even some folks from the reservation, working side by side, sharing food and labor, it might help people see beyond their differences." "Many would refuse to come," Taza warned, but his eyes showed interest. "Some would," Delilah agreed, "but Martha Lou has influence with the church ladies, and she's never cared much for Sykes or his schemes. If we can get her support—" She squeezed Taza's hand. "It's worth trying, isn't it?" A rare smile touched Taza's lips. "Yes," he said simply. "It is worth trying." Outside, the rain continued its gentle song on the roof, but inside, hope burned as warm as the lantern's glow. Tomorrow, Delilah would ride to town and speak with Martha Lou. Tonight, she let herself feel the comfort of Taza's calloused hand beneath hers, and the growing certainty that their marriage of convenience had become something far more real than either of them had expected. Morning sunlight painted the church steeple gold as Delilah tied her horse outside. The preacher's boots echoed on worn floorboards as he emerged from his study, Bible in hand. "Miss Quinn, or should I say Mrs. Red Moon?" Preacher Burke's eyes crinkled with warmth despite his formal tone. "Delilah is fine, preacher." She smoothed her skirts, gathering courage. "I've come to ask for your help. The storm damaged several barns, including the Millers. We're planning a community barn raising, and your support would mean the world." The preacher stroked his chin. A barn raising, you say? With both town folk and— He hesitated. Yes, Delilah said firmly. My husband's people have strong hands and willing hearts. Surely the Lord teaches us to be neighbors to all? Burke's weathered face softened. Indeed he does, child. Indeed he does. He nodded slowly. I'll announce it after Sunday service. From the church, Delilah walked to the schoolhouse where Miss Bennet was tidying up after morning lessons. The schoolmarm listened intently, tapping her chalk against her palm. A community effort, Miss Bennet mused. Well, I do have some influence with the mother's circle, and the children could help with smaller tasks. Her eyes brightened. It might even be educational, a lesson in cooperation. Meanwhile, Taza rode the boundary fences with 3 neighboring ranchers. His skilled hands worked alongside theirs, weaving wire and setting posts. John Miller, watching Taza repair a particularly tricky section, finally spoke up. "Reckon I misjudged you, Red Moon," he admitted gruffly. "Any man who works like that is welcome at my table." The sun was lowering when wagons began arriving at the Quinn Ranch. Martha Lou led a procession of widow ladies, their baskets brimming with cornbread and stewed beans. Ranch hands and their families followed, carrying tools and cooking pots. Delilah's heart swelled as she watched Taza welcome each arrival with dignity and grace. He helped elderly Mrs. Peterson down from her wagon, earning a patted cheek for his trouble. When 2 reservation families arrived with fresh-caught fish wrapped in leaves, the initial awkwardness dissolved in the practical business of setting up cooking fires. The yard hummed with activity. Women clustered around steaming pots while men discussed timber and tools. Children darted between groups, carrying water and messages. Taza moved easily among them all, his quiet strength drawing respect. Martha Lou sidled up to Delilah as she arranged biscuits on a platter. "Your man's got good manners," she observed. "Helped my Tommy with his splinter without being asked. Real gentle about it, too." Delilah felt warmth bloom in her chest. "He's a good man," she said simply. The evening air filled with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Lanterns cast friendly circles of light as people gathered in small groups, sharing food and conversation. Delilah found herself naturally gravitating to Taza's side as they made rounds together, checking that everyone had enough to eat. "Like a proper wife," Martha Lou whispered with a knowing smile, making Delilah blush. The peaceful scene shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Clayton Sykes reined his horse at the edge of the lamplight, his fancy vest gleaming. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he surveyed the gathering. "Well, well," he drawled. "Quite the little charade you've got going here. Playing house with a savage. You must be desperate, Delilah." Before anyone could respond, Tommy, Martha Lou's youngest, piped up. "Mr. Red Moon ain't savage. He showed me how to make a whistle from a reed, and he knows all about water and growing things." Sykes's sneer faltered as several people nodded in agreement. John Miller stepped forward, plate in hand. "You're interrupting our supper, Sykes. Either grab a plate and be civil, or ride on." Delilah held her breath, but Taza remained calm beside her, one hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The touch steadied her. Sykes glanced around, noting the unified front of faces turned against him. His mockery fell flat against the warm scene. The shared food, the mingled laughter, the sense of community that bridged old divisions. With a sharp tug on his reins, he wheeled his horse around and rode off into the gathering dark. As the tension eased, someone struck up a fiddle tune. Children resumed their games while adults drifted back to their conversations. Delilah looked up at Taza, finding his dark eyes already on her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being exactly who you are." A smile touched his lips, and in the golden lamplight, surrounded by the sounds of their growing community, Delilah felt something shift in her heart. This marriage might have started as convenience, but standing here as hostess beside her husband, it felt as natural as breathing. The barn's windows glowed warm against the deepening dusk, and the sound of shared laughter echoed across the yard like a promise of better days to come. The morning after the barn raising dawned clear and bright, but its peace shattered when hoofbeats thundered into the Quinn Ranch yard. Delilah looked up from feeding the chickens to see a federal officer in a crisp blue uniform dismounting his horse. His polished boots kicked up dust as he strode toward her, official papers clutched in his hand. "Mrs. Quinn?" The officer's voice was clipped, formal. "I have a federal order regarding your marriage to the Apache known as Taza Red Moon." Delilah's heart stumbled. She wiped her hands on her apron, taking the papers with trembling fingers. The official seal caught the morning light as she unfolded the document. Her eyes scanned the formal writing, each word hitting like a hammer blow. This says our marriage is annulled." Her voice cracked. "That Taza is already married under tribal law?" "The order is effective immediately." The officer mounted his horse, tipping his hat. "Good day, ma'am." Delilah stood frozen until Taza emerged from the barn, tools in hand. When he saw her face, he set them down slowly. "Is something wrong?" She thrust the papers at him. "Were you already married? All this time?" Taza's dark eyes swept over the document, his expression growing grave. "This speaks of mountain flower ceremony, not marriage, clan adoption. I became brother to Chief's daughter." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Sykes twists truth, uses white man's law against us." "But you never told me," Delilah said, hurt threading through her words. "Did not think it mattered. Was family bond, not marriage bond." Taza's voice held regret. "Should have explained." Before Delilah could respond, more riders approached, the town sheriff and 2 deputies. Their faces were grim as they dismounted. "Taza Red Moon," the sheriff announced, "you're under arrest for fraud against the territory of Arizona." Delilah stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. He's explained—" "Stand aside, Miss Quinn," the sheriff warned. "This comes from higher up." Taza offered no resistance as they shackled his wrists. His dignity remained intact even as they led him to their horses. Delilah followed on horseback as they rode into town, her throat tight with anger and fear. In Dry Fork's dusty main street, a crowd gathered to watch as the deputies chained Taza to the jail's hitching post. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as Clayton Sykes emerged from his office, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "Public display of justice," Sykes announced loudly. "Let this be a lesson about trying to cheat honest citizens of their water rights." Taza stood straight back despite the chains, his face impassive. But Delilah saw the muscle working in his jaw, the subtle signs of his contained fury. Their eyes met briefly across the street, and in that moment she read volumes in his steady gaze. "You can't do this," Delilah protested, but her words fell on deaf ears as the crowd muttered and shifted. Martha Lou appeared at her elbow. "Best get on home, girl. Nothing more to be done here today." The ride back to the ranch was a blur of tears and rage. The house felt empty, haunted by memories of shared meals and quiet conversations. Delilah paced the kitchen, her mind racing. The water rights would revert to her name, but for how long? Sykes would surely press his advantage now. As evening painted the sky purple, hoofbeats announced a visitor. Preacher Burke hurried into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. "Delilah, child, the Lord works in mysterious ways." He pulled out a leather-bound book. "I've been researching federal statutes on tribal marriage customs. They're not recognized in federal courts at all." Delilah blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means this annulment is based on something that legally doesn't exist." The preacher's eyes sparkled. "They can't void your marriage based on a tribal ceremony that federal law doesn't even acknowledge." Hope flared in Delilah's chest. "So our marriage is still valid? If we can rally enough support, present this evidence—" Burke nodded vigorously. "Sykes played his hand too soon. He's counting on people's prejudice to blind them to the law itself." Delilah gripped the kitchen table, her knuckles white. The memory of Taza standing proud despite his chains filled her with fresh determination. "Then we'll fight him with the truth." Every person at that barn raising saw what kind of man Taza is. They saw our community coming together. Indeed they did, Burke squeezed her shoulder. And I reckon quite a few of them won't take kindly to Sykes's underhanded ways. We'll need witnesses, Delilah said, her mind racing. People willing to speak up about Taza's character, about how he's helped the town. Leave that to me, Burke assured her. The Lord didn't give me this pulpit just to preach from it. Sometimes a shepherd has to fight for his flock. Delilah straightened her spine, squaring her shoulders. The sight of Taza in chains had awakened something fierce in her heart. Not just anger at the injustice, but a deep, protective fury she hadn't known she possessed. Tomorrow, she said firmly, we start gathering supporters. Sykes thinks he's won, but he doesn't understand what he's really fighting against. And what's that? Burke asked softly. Delilah's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. The truth. And a woman who's found something worth fighting for. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds as Delilah Quinn hitched her horse outside Preacher Burke's modest home. Her boots struck the wooden porch with determination as she knocked. The preacher answered quickly, already dressed and holding his morning coffee. We need to hold a public hearing, Delilah announced without preamble, on the church steps, where everyone can witness. Burke's eyebrows rose. Frontier common law? Yes, sir. The People's Court, before Sykes can manipulate more federal papers. The preacher stroked his chin thoughtfully. It's been done before. When regular courts fail, frontier justice steps in. He set down his coffee cup. But we'll need witnesses. People willing to stand up to Sykes. That's why I'm headed to Martha Lou's next, and then to every widow and small rancher who came to our barn raising. Burke nodded slowly. I'll speak to the church elders. Meet me at Martha Lou's in an hour. Delilah found Martha Lou already up, hanging washing in her yard. The older woman listened intently, her weathered hands stilling on a sheet. Frontier court, eh? Martha Lou's eyes sparkled. Now that's thinking like a true frontier woman. My Henry, rest his soul, would have appreciated that strategy. Will you help spread the word? Delilah asked. Child, I'll do better than that. Martha Lou dropped the sheet back into her basket. I'll rally every widow from here to Sweetwater Creek. Sykes forgot one thing about frontier women. We talk to everybody. By mid-morning, a network of messengers fanned out across the territory. Widows rode to neighboring ranches. Children carried notes between houses. Martha Lou's washerwoman took word to the reservation camps, where Taza's people received the news with solemn nods. The sun climbed higher as Delilah rode through town, her father's duster coat drawing curious stares. Outside the jail, several young men loitered, taunting Taza through the barred window. Hey, Indian! How's that smart plan working now? Taza sat on his cell's wooden bench, back straight, eyes fixed on some distant point. His silence seemed to frustrate his tormentors more than any response could have. Delilah dismounted, her spurs jingling on the wooden sidewalk. Don't you boys have anything better to do? They shuffled away, shooting dark looks over their shoulders. Delilah approached the window, her heart aching at the sight of Taza's proud profile. Tomorrow will be different, she said softly. Taza turned then, meeting her gaze. You have plan? The whole town's going to hear the truth, every word of it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Truth is good weapon, sharp like knife. Sharper, Delilah agreed, and we've got plenty of it. Throughout the afternoon, the town hummed with activity. Merchants whispered behind counters. Ranch hands passed messages during water breaks. Even the telegraph operator found himself unusually busy as news spread to outlying homesteads. Preacher Burke visited shopkeepers who had witnessed Taza's respectful trading. Martha Lou gathered statements from ranchers whose fences Taza had helped mend. The schoolmarm recalled how he had fixed her broken wagon wheel without being asked. By evening, Dry Fork buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Sykes's men rode through town, watching the unusual activity with suspicious eyes. But they could do nothing to stop the ripple of conversations, the quiet gathering of resolve among the townspeople. Delilah returned to the jail as the sun set, carrying a basket of fresh cornbread and beans. The deputy let her bring it to Taza's cell, watching closely as she passed it through the bars. "The whole town's talking," she said quietly. "Some are scared to stand against Sykes, but others—" She smiled. "Others remember how you helped them, how you proved yourself a better neighbor than the syndicate ever was." Taza broke the cornbread carefully. "Your people surprise me. Some have good hearts under hard shells." "Like that old tortoise you showed me by the creek?" "Yes." His dark eyes held warmth despite their surroundings. "Slow to trust, but true once won." Delilah glanced at the deputy, who had retreated to his desk. "Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, on the church steps. Everyone will be there." "I will be ready." Taza's voice carried the same steady strength she had come to rely on. "Whatever comes." Later, as darkness settled over Dry Fork, groups gathered in parlors and kitchens, on back porches and in barn doorways. They spoke in low voices about water rights and justice, about the difference between law and right. Some remembered their own grandparents' stories of frontier courts where communities had stood together against those who would twist the law to their advantage. In the jail, Taza sat peacefully, watching the stars through his barred window. In her ranch house, Delilah paced by lamplight, rehearsing the words she would speak. In his study, Preacher Burke polished his brass letter opener, a gift from his congregation, its surface reflecting the determined set of his jaw. And throughout the town, people lay awake in their beds, wondering which way the tide would turn when the sun rose again over Dry Fork Crossing. High noon blazed overhead as townspeople gathered on the church steps. The sun beat down mercilessly, but nobody seemed to mind the heat. Ranchers stood shoulder to shoulder with reservation families. Widows fanned themselves with handkerchiefs while children perched on fence posts for a better view. Preacher Burke stood at the top of the steps, his Bible tucked under one arm. His weathered face held the gravity of the moment as Delilah Quinn approached, wearing her best dress and her father's old duster. The leather creaked as she climbed the steps, chin held high. Clayton Sykes lounged against his fancy buckboard across the street, a smirk playing at his lips. His men were scattered through the crowd, hands never far from their gun belts. "Folks of Dry Fork," the preacher's voice carried across the gathering, "we're here today to right a wrong, to let truth speak louder than paper." 2 deputies led Taza from the jail. He walked with quiet dignity despite his shackles, drawing murmurs from the crowd. Martha Lou stepped forward, offering him water from her tin cup. He accepted with a gracious nod that made Sykes's smirk falter. Delilah withdrew the forged annulment order from her pocket, holding it up for all to see. Her voice rang clear and strong. "This paper claims my husband has another wife among his people. It's a lie, crafted to steal our water rights." She began reading the document aloud, her finger tracing each false claim. "That there's a legal order," Sykes called out. "Federal authority." "Is it?" Delilah's eyes flashed. "Then why was it delivered by your man instead of a proper marshal?" She turned to the crowd. "My husband explained the truth. The so-called marriage was a clan adoption ceremony, a family taking in an orphaned child. Nothing more." Taza stood straight, his presence commanding even in chains. "I speak truth before Creator," he said clearly. "No other wife, no deception." Martha Lou stepped forward. "I've watched this man work harder than any 3 cowboys put together. Fixed my fence when Storm knocked it down. Never asked a thing in return." Other voices joined in. The schoolmarm spoke of Taza's kindness. A rancher recalled how he had helped rescue stranded cattle. A reservation elder explained the difference between marriage and clan adoption, his dignified words carrying the weight of generations. Delilah held the fraudulent paper high. "This document is built on lies." With deliberate movements, she tore it in half, The sound of ripping paper cut through the murmurs like a knife. "But my marriage vows were real, and I mean to speak them again, right here, before God and all of you." She descended the steps to stand before Taza. Her hands trembled slightly as she took his shackled ones. "I, Delilah Quinn, take you as my husband. Not for water rights or legal papers, but because you've shown me what real honor looks like. Because you've taught me that different ways can work together, like your irrigation channels joining our streams." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Because I choose you, Taza Red Moon, with my whole heart." Taza's dark eyes softened. "I choose you also, Delilah Quinn, for your brave spirit, for your true heart, for all days Creator gives us." A powerful silence fell over the crowd. Then Martha Lou started clapping, and others joined in. The sound swelled until it echoed off the church walls. The territorial judge, who had been watching from his seat near the steps, stood up. He cleared his throat loudly until the applause died down. "Having reviewed the evidence and witnessed this testimony, I find this annulment order lacks proper jurisdiction and authentication." He glared at Sykes. "It's void. The marriage stands." Cheers erupted. The deputies, looking relieved, unlocked Taza's shackles. They fell away as Delilah stepped into his embrace, their first true public display of affection, drawing even more applause. Sykes pushed away from his buckboard, face dark with fury, but looking around at the united crowd, settlers and Apaches, ranchers and widows all standing together, he seemed to shrink slightly. Without a word, he climbed into his rig and flicked the reins, driving away in a cloud of dust. The preacher raised his hands. "Let us thank the Lord for justice done this day." As the crowd bowed their heads, Delilah leaned against Taza's solid presence, feeling his quiet strength flow into her. Their hands remained clasped, not just for show now, but as a true bond between equals. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dry Fork's main street as Clayton Sykes stormed from saloon to store, trying to rally support. His face grew redder with each rejection. Even longtime allies turned their backs, screen doors clicking shut in his wake. "You're all fools!" he shouted, waving his arms. "That Apache will steal your water next." Martha Lou stood in her shop doorway, arms crossed. "Only thief I see is you, Clayton Sykes, using false papers to grab what ain't yours." Other townsfolk gathered on their porches, their silent stares a wall of resistance. When Sykes reached for his gun belt, 3 ranch hands stepped forward, hands hovering near their own weapons. The message was clear. Violence would not be tolerated. At the hotel, Mr. Beecham watched the scene unfold while packing his valise. He'd seen enough frontier towns to recognize when profit margins had evaporated. A divided town meant delayed construction, endless legal battles, and mounting costs. With a resigned sigh, he penned a brief note withdrawing the railroad's offer and caught the afternoon stage out of Dry Fork. The setting sun painted the Quinn ranch house in warm, golden light as Delilah set the table for supper. For the first time, she placed Taza's setting beside hers instead of across, a small change that spoke volumes. The scent of fresh cornbread filled the kitchen as Taza entered, carrying an armload of firewood. They ate in comfortable silence until Delilah spoke softly. "You don't have to sleep in the barn anymore." Taza looked up, his dark eyes gentle. "Are you certain?" "I reckon I am." She touched the silver band on her finger. "Those vows today, they weren't just for show." "Among my people," Taza said carefully, "a true marriage grows like spring grass, slowly but with strong roots." Delilah reached across the table. After a moment, Taza's larger hand enveloped hers. The lamplight cast their joined shadows on the wall as they sat together, no longer bound by necessity, but by something deeper taking root in both their hearts. "I'd like to learn more about your ways," Delilah said, "and maybe teach you some of mine." Taza's smile was warm as summer rain. "Together we will make new ways." The morning sun glinted off fresh-turned earth as shovels bit into the dry ground. Delilah watched from atop her horse as townspeople and tribal families worked side by side, digging channels that would soon carry life-giving water across the parched land. Taza moved among the workers, explaining traditional Apache irrigation techniques that had sustained his people for generations. Martha Lou wiped sweat from her brow, pausing in her work. "Never thought I'd see the day. Townfolk and Apache working together like this." "Times are changing," Delilah replied, dismounting to help clear stones from the channel. Over the next several days, the irrigation project took shape. Wooden gates controlled water flow at key points, while carefully graded channels ensured every drop reached where it was needed most. Children from both communities played together, carrying water in tin cups to thirsty workers. The preacher himself rolled up his sleeves to help lay stone linings that would prevent seepage. Each evening, Delilah and Taza shared quiet suppers in their home, planning the next day's work. Where once awkward silences had hung between them, now comfortable conversation flowed. Taza taught her Apache words for water and growth, while she shared stories of her father's early days on the ranch. "You would have liked him," Delilah said one night, thinking of her father. "He always said water belonged to no one man." Taza nodded. "Water is life. It connects all people." On the 7th day, they opened the main gate. Crystal clear spring water rushed through the new channels, bringing hope to the dusty reservation fields. Townsfolk and tribal families gathered to watch, their faces reflecting joy and pride in their shared accomplishment. As the sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Delilah and Taza stood alone by the flowing water. Without words, Taza gently placed his hand on Delilah's belly. The gesture spoke of possibilities, of sons and daughters born not from duty, but from love growing as surely as water brings life to desert soil. Delilah covered his hand with her own, her heart full. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had bloomed into something true and lasting, like the fresh green shoots already sprouting along the water's edge. Autumn sunshine warmed the town square of Dry Fork Crossing as bright bunting fluttered between the buildings. The harvest festival buzzed with life, children running with streamers, women laying out pies on long tables, and men setting up fiddle stands for dancing. What made this year different were the Apache families mingling freely among the townsfolk, sharing traditional foods and stories. Delilah's red hair caught the light as she walked hand in hand with Taza through the celebration. Martha Lou rushed up to hug them both, pressing a fresh apple pie into their hands. "Made special for my favorite neighbors," she beamed. Everywhere they turned, genuine smiles greeted them. The schoolmarm showed off her students' drawings of the new irrigation channels. Ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully to Taza, asking his advice about winter grazing. Apache mothers offered Delilah tastes of traditional harvest dishes, explaining each ingredient's meaning. When Preacher Burke stepped up to bless the feast, the crowd fell silent. His weathered face creased with joy as he raised his hands. "Friends, what we celebrate today is more than just a good harvest. We celebrate mercy triumphing over greed, justice flowing like water, and hearts opening to understanding. This bounty before us stands as testament to what can grow when we choose to do right by one another." As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in deep oranges, fiddle music filled the air. Couples twirled across the packed dirt, their laughter rising into the evening. Delilah caught Taza's eye, and without a word, they slipped away from the celebration. Back at their ranch, in the quiet of their home, they stood before their fireplace. No preacher or witnesses were needed as they clasped hands, their eyes meeting in the soft lamplight. The words they shared were simple but carried the weight of truth, promises renewed not from necessity, but from hearts that had learned to beat as one. Later they walked together to the spring that had started it all. Water burbled over rocks, steady and sure, flowing out to nourish both town and reservation. Taza drew Delilah close, their silhouettes merging in the gathering dusk. Here stood a family built not on bargains or water rights, but on love that had grown as naturally as wheat in well-watered soil. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe, and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.